Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Recha Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Exodus, the 21st chapter. And as we went through in the 20th chapter, right, it ended with the Lord calling Moses up into the mount. And, he speaks to Moses, right? So as we go into Exodus 21, this goes into some of the laws or judgments that the Lord basically tells Moses, all right, that basically these are laws that the people are to follow, right, in terms of governing them and in their way of living. So this is Exodus 21:1. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. And the word judgments here goes into, like a law, right, or an ordinance to say, well, this is how you handle certain cases, right? If this happens, this is how you judge the matter. Verse 2, if thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. So if you're a Hebrew, right, you buy another Israelite as a servant, they'll serve you for 6 years, but you got to let him go in the 7th year, basically for nothing. So he earns his freedom. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. So if you bought him and it was just him, in that 7th year, after the 6 years, he shall basically be free. He can go by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him, right? So, so if you bought him along with his wife, they will both be free to go. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's. Okay, so what that means is, and he shall go out by himself. So if he comes to work, right, he gets bought for 6 years. He's working, but the master gives him a wife, right, out of the master's servants. When it's time for him to go, he doesn't get to take her, right? He got to go out by himself, because technically both her and the children, right, still belong to the master, because they belonged to the master before he got them, right? They weren't his. And it's kind of like an example would say, let's say you had like, I don't know, 5 or 10 pair of sneakers, and you have maybe a servant wear one while he's serving you. When it's time for him to go, just because he was wearing your sneakers doesn't mean that it's now his. It was yours. You bought it, right, before he even came to serve you. So likewise in this manner, that's why it says what it says there, right? They were the masters, or at least the wife was the master's. The woman belonged to the master before this male servant came in there. Therefore, when he's leaving, the woman and the children would belong to the master. However, if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. So if the servant decides, you know what, I've been, working for such and such for this long, and, he treats me pretty well, I now have a family and I don't want to leave them here, then plainly, explicitly, he would say this. And it says here, verse 7 or verse 6, then his master shall bring him onto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door, or onto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl. Somewhat similar to when you get a piercing right in your ear, your earlobe. So basically, if the servant says he wants to stay, then the master would make sure that he brings him onto the judges for a witness, and then they would go to, basically this would be like the door of the house of the master, and he would bore, which is to pierce, the ear of his servant with an awl, and this is what that looks like. right? Kind of like a screwdriver. So you'd use that, and more than likely they probably maybe have the ear, pressed against the door post, and then pierce it, because you need some hard or solid background, to smack the awl against, when you press the ear, so that you can actually create that hole. Like today, if you go and get an ear piercing, they have like a what looks like this, not piercings, ear piercer. Oh, piercer tool. Yeah, they have something that looks like this. So it already has the thing in the back, right? So that way you have the lobe caught between the two, and that way when you press, you can actually pierce the skin. Because if there's nothing behind it, then you're not really doing much. So in this case, they would use the doorpost as that. It says here, and he shall serve him forever. So at that point, the servant gives up his freedom and agrees that, okay, you are basically agreeing, almost like a contract, to serve your master forever. Verse 7, and if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. Going to show you the difference in between men and women. Now, this is what the Lord is telling Moses, right? If a woman is sold to be a maidservant or a female slave, she doesn't get her freedom after 6 years like the men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. So, say this master buys her and takes her to wife. If he ends up not liking her, then he has to allow her to be redeemed, meaning she can be bought back, all right, for her freedom. To sell her onto a strange nation, he shall have no power, meaning he can't say, okay, well, I don't like her, so I'm gonna just sell her to a strange nation, i.e. a heathen. Seeing he have dealt deceitfully with her, yeah, because he's the one breaking that covenant after betrothing her to himself. So he can't sell her to a foreign nation. And if he have betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. So if instead of, say he buys a female servant, a maid servant, says, I'm going to give her to my son as his wife, you now have to treat her as a daughter and not as a servant. Verse 10, if he take him another wife, so if, going back to the case where he took the maid servant to be his wife, but now he gets another wife, so he marries another woman in addition, then concerning the maid servant that became his woman that he took, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall he not diminish. So you can't basically just neglect her, right? Because you now have another wife. So you got to feed her. You got to make sure she's clothed. You got to make sure she's satisfied, right? As Apostle Ramlab once said, it's your duty to please that booty. So you got to fulfill the duties of marriage. If he do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money. So if he neglects in any of these, then she can basically claim her freedom and say, well, he neglected to do these things onto me after getting his other wife. Therefore, now she can be free to go without money, meaning she didn't have to pay for anything. She doesn't have to be redeemed. She's free. Now, dealing with, as it says, personal injuries. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. This is in the sense of murder, right? So you intentionally kill somebody, you're going to be put to death. And if a man lie not in wait, when you lie in wait, you're plotting. So this is saying if this is not intentional, so this person is not like meaning to do this, but God deliver him into his hand. So if this is an accident, right, the Most High sets it up to where once somebody becomes a victim to somebody else and dies accidentally, then I will appoint thee a place whither he shall flee. So the one who slew the other on accident, there will be a refuge city that he will be able to flee to for safety. And the laws, as we keep on going through it, expounds a bit more on that. But if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor, so that is intentionally premeditated, right? To slay him with guile. When you go into that word guile, it goes into craftiness or shrewdness. So you plan this. Thou shalt take him from mine altar that he may die. Okay, meaning you're gonna put him to death, but obviously you're not gonna slay him by the altar if he happens to be there, right? You're gonna separate him from there, because shedding man's blood there would make it, that's a no-no, right? When you go to when you read this in the NLT, it says, however, if someone deliberately kills another person, then the slayer must be dragged even from my altar and put to death. And this is probably why Joab went and caught hold of the horns of the altar when he knew that they were coming for him, because he probably thought that he would be able to, preserve his life. But Solomon said, well, if that's where he wants to die, so be it. Verse 15, and he that smiteth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. And when you go into that word smiteth, it involves striking them, but also killing them. And this is with intention, right? Because you can have a case where it's accidental. You don't see them. Maybe you're stretching and you don't see somebody behind you and then your hand hits them. That's an accident, right? That's different. But this is for a case where, like today, right? You have certain people that actually, through disrespect and lack of discipline and fear, they will actually put hands on their parents, right? Intentionally knowing what they're doing. The scriptures say they're to be put to death because that's out of order. And when you're raising a proper society, if the man is in order, the woman is in order. And if the woman and the man are in order, the child is in order, because so long as the child fears their parents, they can be raised up and corrected in the right way. And that allows the society to flourish in following the laws of the land. But when you have rebellious little demons like you do today, and you have the judgments that are not executed, that's why you end up having a messed up society like this. Verse 16, and he that stealeth a man, that's kidnapping, and selleth him, that's trafficking, if he be found in his hand. So if you are partaking in human trafficking, or you kidnap somebody and they find that person with you, he shall surely be put to death. That's the penalty. That's the law. The penalty of that according to the law. He that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Once again, doubling down on verse 15, because they go hand in hand, right? When you go into that word curseth, it's to put in one word, disrespect, right? To be slight, swift, trifling, be of little account, right? To lightly esteem. And when you do that, right, to bring contempt or dishonor, when you do that, that's like, you see those videos, you have these kids cursing out their parents, insulting them, putting hands on them, completely disrespecting them. They become unruly and they cannot be disciplined, right? They're to be put to death, to put away that evil from Israel. If men strive together and one smite another with a stone or with his fist. So if, they get into an altercation and they get into a fight, and then, one of them hits another one with a stone or some object, or he punches him and he die not. So he gets hurt, but he doesn't die, but keepeth his bed, meaning that he gets so badly injured, he's confined to his bed, right? When it says keepeth his bed, because, it doesn't mean that you're going to fight somebody and then usually you fight somebody and then they beat your ass, your bed disappears. But this case just so happens where he punched you so hard you fell down, but your bed stayed in your possession. It's not what it means by keepeth his bed. It means that you're basically, like today they'll say you're in the hospital, because when you're in the hospital, where are you usually? In a bed. So there's a fight amongst two men or men, and one of them gets badly injured by the other, to where they're in a bed or in a hospital bed or confined to the bed. if he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff. So if the injured one is able to recover and they can still walk and move, even if it's with support, crutches, whatever the case is, then he that smote him shall be, then shall he that smote him be quit, meaning he would be acquitted, right? You wouldn't be charged with this, except for this penalty, which is that only he shall pay for the loss of his time, which is the one that is injured was confined to their bed, so they couldn't work, they couldn't earn any wages or anything like that. So that time that they lost, the wages that they lost, the one who caused the injury would pay for that, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. And then you're also going to pay for any medical expenses that are needed for the injured one to be completely healed, to be fully recovered. And if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be surely punished. Okay, so if now it doesn't say he'll be put to death, but it says he'll be punished, right? And likely that punishment would be maybe some fine, or something that is determined by the judges. So basically, you have a servant or a slave, and you, as it says, with a rod or a stick or something like that, if you end up going overboard and you beat them to the point where they die, there's a recompense for that. However, notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. Meaning, if the servant survives, right? Meaning they survive day 1 and day 2. Maybe they may be badly injured, but they're able to recover after a day or two. Then the owner or the master will not be punished, for he is his money, because that servant is the property, right? Or bought with the money of the owner, so that's his. And the reason it also mentions a day or two is because they may have, the owner may beat the servant really badly and maybe even fatally wound them, but it may not be an instant death. And most fatal wounds, you probably won't make it past day 1 or 2. Maybe it's something like internal bleeding and they ended up dying the next day, or, something really bad, I don't know, a hemorrhage or something like that, that doesn't cause them to die right away, but it takes a couple more hours. That way, this buffer period can let you determine if the servant's death or injury was fatal, and then the master would be punished or not. Verse 22: if men strive and hurt a woman with child, so let's say some men are going at it, they're fighting or whatever the case is, and through that altercation they end up hurting a pregnant woman. So they bump into her, they push her, they hit her, whatever. Maybe even she comes to try and get them to stop, and then they just like, get off me, and push her or something. It says here, so that her fruit depart from her. Now, when you go into this word, her fruit depart from her, it's not that she has a miscarriage per se, but more so if she has a premature birth, meaning she goes into like premature labor or something like that. Because when you go into that word depart, it doesn't mean like to die or to eliminate. It's more to like deliver, right? Yataza, it says to go, to come out, to exit, right? To go forth, to proceed, to come, or go forth, to come out of, to deliver, right? To be brought out or forth. So because that today they'll call that a blunt abdominal trauma, which is one of the causes for a woman going into premature labor. So if that's the case, and she ends up going to premature labor, and yet no mischief follows, so she's okay and the baby is okay and survives, then he shall be surely punished, the one who hurt the woman, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him. So whatever the husband says, I want this is the punishment that's going to be on him. Oftentimes this was like probably some monetary amount. It says, and he shall pay as the judges determine. See, So the husband says, no, this you gotta pay this amount. The judges are gonna basically mediate that to see, okay, is that reasonable? And they will get the final say. And that's what the man who ended up being the cause of this situation would pay. Now, the alternative case is, and if any mischief follow, so if she has a premature baby, but it becomes a miscarriage, the baby doesn't survive, or she doesn't survive, or she gets hurt, or the baby is hurt, then thou shalt give life for life. So if a life is lost, whether it's the mother or the child, guess whose life is going to need to be given up? The one who caused it, right? Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So this is basically like an exact recompense, right? So if there was any harm done, the one who caused it would have to suffer that loss. An eye, a tooth, a hand. Now, when it says burning, it's an example is, one of them may have pushed the woman. She may have fallen, depending on the location, it may have been, some water on the stove, something is cooking, whatever, and then she may have gotten hurt. That is a part of the mischief that follows. Okay. And that, if she may have gotten burned or something like that, guess what? The other person would have to pay for that. And they might actually not burn them alive, but once again, it's to be equivalent, right, of the loss that the woman or the baby suffered. And if a man smite the eye of his servant or the eye of his maid, this is the master, that is. So you punish them, right? You may, because, you may get angry that they did something wrong, and then hit them in a certain way where they lose an eye. It says here that it perish. So you smite the eye and it perish and they lose an eye, whether it's your maid servant or your manservant, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. So at that point, they're free to go. You can't keep them anymore because of that damage. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go free for his tooth's sake. So master would have to be careful with how they hit their servants. See, so the Lord has everything in a proper order. You don't just misjudge just because that you own them, that's your servant, you do whatever. No. Now if your servant is cunning and you go to hit them and they turn around and give you a big ass smile, cheese, and they lose their whole front grill, well, there you go. Verse 28. If an ox gore a man or a woman, gore is to use its horns to basically stab you. So if an ox gore a man or a woman, that they die. Then one example is like when you look at those people that they do the bull chasing. I forgot what they're called. Bullfighters. Yeah, bullfighters. This when it goes wrong, like something like that, that person is gored, okay, with the horn right there. All right. So if in this case, if somebody's ox does that, gores somebody, and they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned. So they're gonna kill the ox, and his flesh shall not be eaten. All right, it ain't gonna be a meal right there. No. But the owner of the ox shall be quit. So if this was like an accident or the owner had no knowledge of this, it couldn't have been prevented, then the owner is going to be acquitted. But if the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, so they have a bad habit of doing this, and it has been testified to his owner, so the owner now knows maybe the ox did this before. Push meaning to gore, to poke. So the ox, maybe it didn't kill somebody, but it poked or it tried to, and they let the owner know, hey, you gotta watch your ox, man, because it can hurt somebody with the way it's moving. And he have not kept him in. So you know this, but you still let the ox loose, or you didn't break it in or discipline it, or just keep it inside. But that he hath killed a man or a woman, and so due to your neglect, the ox now ends up killing somebody, then the consequence is the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. So you better, better watch that ox. If there be laid on him a sum of money, then he shall give for the ransom of his life whatsoever is laid upon him. So the alternative is, if the relatives of the dead are willing to accept money, right, instead of your life, then you have to, you'd have the option to pay that money, and then, you would live. Whether he have gored a son or have gored a daughter, according to this judgment shall it be unto him. So in this case, there is no difference between if the victim is male or female. It's the same punishment. If the ox shall push a manservant or a maidservant, the word push here is to gore, which is, once again, to kill. He shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So you're going to put the ox to death, and you're going to pay the master of that servant, because now that's their loss. And if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or an ass fall therein. So for whatever reason, you dig up a pit, you dig up a hole, and you don't end up covering it up, and somebody else's ox comes and falls victim and falls into that pit, the owner of the pit shall make it good and give money unto the owner of them, and the dead beast shall be his. So the ass falls in there and dies, or the ox falls in there and dies. You who dug the pit are gonna have to pay the owner, but you, basically, the dead animal will be yours. And if one man's ox hurt another's, that he die, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money of it. So you got your ox, it kills another man's ox. You got to sell that ox, divide the share, and then you split that concerning the live ox. And the dead ox also shall they divide. So, in that case it's dead, but, you can still utilize it, right? So you would divide that. Half would go to the owner, the original owner of it, and half would go to the owner whose ox hurt or killed the other ox. Verse 36, or if it be known, right? Now, this is the alternative. This here is more just accident. It happened out of nowhere. It's okay, cool. But if it be known that the ox hath used to push in time past, so if the owner knew that his ox, used to do this, or has a habit of doing this, and his owner hath not kept him in, similar to what we read up above, he shall surely pay an ox for ox. So you're going to need to replace that person's ox. You're going to need to give up an ox to give to that person whose ox died at the hand of yours. And the dead shall be his own. So you're going to basically take the dead one, but you got to give that other one a live ox. And that brings us to the end of the book of Exodus, the 21st chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Racha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.